Hey music lovers, I'm Generation X. I'm a Christian and I'm a metalhead. And today's video isn't exactly about metal, but it's about 6 Christian artists or bands that I feel like have the greatest impact on Christian music from the 1970s that I think shaped Christian music and really took it to another level. And the first thing I like to say is these are not in any particular order. This isn't a ranking system. This is just me talking about bands I really think shaped Christian rock and Christian music. Let's start with second chapter of Acts. The Easter song, when they introduced that guitar solo, and it wasn't really unprecedented, but it was definitely something that didn't mix with kind of churchy style music, which they seem to kind of bridge the gap there. But this album was in 1974. They have a bunch of albums. I own several of them, and they are not my favorite band, but I will say this. Every now and then I go ahead and I pull out second chapter of Acts. Which Way the Wind Blows is a fantastic song. Of course, the Easter song is a fantastic song. This is a great album, and this was one of their early ones, and they were definitely pioneers when it came to Jesus music and Christian music. Now, the next one goes without saying, and that is Larry Norman. You cannot have a Legends of 1970s Christian music without talking about Larry Norman, who was really probably the father of Christian rock today. And this represents one of his best albums. It's got songs like Why Don't You Look Into Jesus, which was allegedly written about Janis Joplin, and I Wish We'd All Been Ready, which is one of the most classic end-time songs ever written. And then Why Should the Devil Have All the Good Music? Just outstanding stuff. He's got multiple albums. I've got several Larry Norman albums. Maybe one day I'll go ahead and take you through my whole Larry Norman collection, because he was a flawed man, definitely had his problems, but he was definitely a pioneer when it comes to Christian music, especially Christian rock. And this man changed the game. And he coined the phrase, he was too worldly for the church, he was too churchy for the world. And that's kind of what inspired the song, Why Should the Devil Have All the Good Music? Also, one thing that made Larry Norman so innovative is he would do things on the inside of his albums, like put in these little newspapers and different things like that. But the year of this is 1973, which I think is when this album was released, somewhere in that window. It says 1972 to 1978 on this. So I don't know if this is like a compilation, but this is part of a trilogy, and this is part 1 of the trilogy in this collection. But anyhow, Larry Norman was an absolute legend. And then next is the legendary Phil Keaggy. You cannot talk about 70s Jesus music without Phil Keaggy. Phil Keaggy was really a pioneer when it came to the use of electric guitar and guitar solos in Christian music. Whenever you involve Phil Keaggy in a project, you knew the guitars were going to be amazing. And from what I understand, I think Phil Keaggy was missing like part of one of his hands, part of one of his fingers or something, but just wild that he was so good on the guitar. So early in Christian music, this album is from 1976. I think he has a few that are earlier than that, but he has several albums. And you also cannot talk about the impact of 70s Christian Jesus music without Love Song. Love Song was a pioneer. They were discovered by Chuck Smith early on in the Jesus movement, and the song Welcome Back was just kind of legendary, and this album actually has that song on it. This is from 1971, so super early in the Jesus revolution and Jesus music. And a little bit more on Chuck Girard in a minute, because I'm going to give him an honorable mention. But now we got to talk about somebody else. You cannot talk about Jesus music without talking about Keith Green. Keith Green had a piercing voice. He was really sang with conviction, and songs like Asleep in the Light, My Eyes Are Dry, Make My Life a Prayer, Oh Lord, You're Beautiful, and just so many different songs that he came out with that were really piercing. I'll never forget the first time I heard Asleep in the Light, when it said that Jesus rose from the grave and you can't even get out of bed. It's just, wow, piercing. I still get convicted when I listen to him, and his life was ended way too soon to a tragic plane crash, and there's just no telling what his ministry could have become had he survived. But what an incredible voice, what an incredible artist. I wouldn't quite consider him rock, but he definitely fell into that vein a little bit more in like a soft rock kind of way. I don't know what category to put him in, but man, he was just simply incredible. This album probably represents some of the best of his music. And then last but most certainly not least is going to be Petra. This came out in 1973, and Petra had an unbelievable influence on Christian music. This album is awesome. It kind of has a rockabilly sound, and it's got some really great songs on it. For example, Walking in the Light is actually an underrated song. Go back to the Bible. But my favorite song on here is probably everyone's favorite song on this album. That is Lucas McGraw, What's Come Over You. It gives me kind of like a Curtis Lowe vibe, to where there's this man that has an experience with God, where Curtis Lowe from Lynyrd Skynyrd isn't about an old man, but it's a storytelling song about a man. But then I want to give an honorable mention, and that is the lead singer of Love Song, and that is Chuck Girard, who took on a solo career and put out several really great albums. Glow in the Dark is my favorite. This one just has some amazing songs on it. First of all, Something Supernatural, the harmonicas in that song. Oh my goodness. If you've not heard Something Supernatural by Chuck Girard, you've got to hear it. And then Old Dan Cotton. Old Dan Cotton gives me kind of that Lucas McGraw and Curtis Lowe vibe. It's just kind of a ballad about a man that had an encounter with God. And Chuck Girard's influence cannot go understated. Him and Larry Norman were both in actually pretty popular bands before they became Christians, so that's pretty wild as well. But anyhow, this is some amazing Jesus music from the 1970s and 6 bands that influenced Christian music, I believe, more than any other. Let me know what you think, because I know some of you are going to disagree with me in the comments. God bless you. Keep calm. Jesus on.